It's 2025. No child should die from starvation, let alone in a place where food is just a few kilometres away. Now we're seeing staggering levels of child malnutrition that since February, when the ceasefire collapsed, have been rising month on month on month. That's completely preventable. And so what we're seeing is, without a doubt, a human-made famine. An information war has been waged as well as the war on the ground. And I think it's up to every individual to recognize that they are a witness to what is happening and to think critically about what they're hearing and what they're seeing. At a government level, I do think that more can be done. The international community still has not found a way to influence this situation, to end this conflict, or even to increase the amount of aid entering the Gaza Strip.
Tess Ingram, welcome to PoliticsJOE.
Thanks for having me.
How would you like to introduce yourself to the audience?
I'm a UNICEF spokesperson in Gaza, currently in Mawassi, which is in the middle area of the Gaza Strip.
And this is your fourth time in Gaza. Just tell me, like, in terms of timeline from first time you arrived there to now, how has the situation deteriorated?
I feel like I always expect the situation to have become worse. This time is definitely the worst that I've ever seen. I've previously been in the Gaza Strip in January and April 2024, and then again in February of this year, which was a ceasefire. And it was nice to be here when there was a brief moment of respite and that the response was really geared up and helping people. But now, August 2025, this is proper catastrophe. We have people dying of malnutrition. Children continue to be killed by bombardments. Aid is not coming in anywhere near the quantities that it needs to. This is, by far and away the worst I've ever seen.
As well as the issues with how aid is distributed and how aid reaches people in Gaza, there's also a kind of dearth of information coming from the Gaza Strip itself. It's kind of the mediation is through Israeli authorities almost. As a person who works with an international organization like UNICEF, how do you feel your role has changed from being a humanitarian worker to kind of almost a journalist in some way, as the only people that are kind of allowed in to document what's going on?
It's a good question, and it's something I think we don't talk about enough. But the international media has not been allowed to enter the Gaza Strip, which means that reading out what is happening on the ground has been left with Palestinian journalists who are bravely doing whatever they can to communicate what's happening to their communities, but they're constantly under attack. So many journalists have been killed in Gaza. And then we as aid workers are really trying to be impartial and independent and speak about what we see on the ground through our work. But it's a very difficult proposition because it almost puts us in the line of fire. There's been so much criticism of the United Nations because of that role that we're taking on in terms of speaking out about what we're seeing.
And so today there was the report from the IPC that declared famine in Gaza City. It's also stating that in the next month or so, places like Deir Al-Balah and Younis are currently at risk of reaching famine conditions in September. Just how preventable was the situation that we're experiencing in Gaza City now?
It's 2025. No child should die from starvation, let alone in a place where food is just a few kilometres away, as is the other life-saving aid, nutrition treatments, water that can save these children's lives. And I think it's important to note that there was almost no malnutrition in the Gaza Strip before this conflict, compared to other parts of the world where malnutrition has existed before a conflict started. Here, it was basically zero. And now we're seeing staggering levels of child malnutrition that since February, when the ceasefire collapsed, have been rising month on month on month. That's completely preventable. And so what we're seeing is, without a doubt, a human-made famine. It's a result of engineered scarcity, of a not enough aid entering the Gaza Strip and reaching the people who need it.
I was speaking to your colleague James Elder last month or the month before, just as the the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation more or less took over the distribution of aid in the Gaza Strip. And he briefly touched on how the difference in how the aid was being distributed by an organization like that and UNICEF. Have you seen any kind of like stripping back of the GHF's control over how food is distributed? Are UNICEF kind of given more control over operations and distribution? And if not, why not?
In the past few weeks, we have seen a slight improvement in what the UN has been able to do in the Gaza Strip. That's because the Israeli authorities, after some international pressure, said that they would facilitate UN movements around the crossings where the aid comes in. That means we've been able to bring in a few more trucks, and we've been able to pick up the aid from the crossings a little bit easier than we did before. And that's really important because I don't know that many people realize this, but the crossings aren't like drive-throughs. We can't just go there whenever we want to collect the aid. We have to get permission to go there in what we call a coordinated movement with the Israeli authorities. And we don't always get that permission. And sometimes when we do, it can take hours, there are delays, it becomes unsafe. Or we're stuck at the crossing and we can't leave. We're given a route out that doesn't make sense. So there are all of these sorts of challenges that we face, which have marginally improved in the last couple of weeks, but nowhere near enough for it to make a considerable difference. And if we were serious about overcoming those concerns, we would see a much bigger change. We would be able to see the UN get back to what we've proved is possible and what really should happen tomorrow, which is 600 trucks a day coming into the Gaza Strip by the UN and our humanitarian partners and bringing that aid to the over 400 distribution points that we were able to operate during the ceasefire. That's what we can do if we're allowed to do our jobs.
Why do you think the Israeli authorities are making it so difficult for UN authorities to operate food aid in the Gaza Strip?
The claims that have been made against us is that our aid is being diverted to Hamas, but there's been no evidence of that claim provided to us. And I've been part of distributions and have never witnessed that firsthand. Of course, desperate people try and take aid from our trucks, but they're people who are trying to survive. And you can understand that given the months of deprivation that they've endured. I think any of us would do the same. They don't know when their next meal is coming. The answer to that, of course, is to increase the volume of aid. The desperation will reduce, the looting will reduce, and we saw that happen during the ceasefire. So that's what we need to happen, not the setup of an alternative mechanism that's dangerous and ineffective.
The Israeli government makes the case that it's a consistent policy of Israel to facilitate humanitarian assistance to Gaza civilians. Do you think that up until this point, that has been demonstrated in realities on the ground by how Israel has managed the situation?
We've not seen enough aid. Throughout the 22 months of this conflict, it has been consistently far too short. Only during the ceasefire was aid at the volume that was needed entering. That was the only moment in time. All of the other months of this conflict, it's been completely insufficient. And that's why we're in the situation that we're in today. Aid is entering the Gaza Strip, but it could enter at much larger volumes from many other crossings that remain closed, and it could be better facilitated to the people that need it. They should be able to receive it where they are with dignity and with safety, and that is still not happening.
On the IPC report, Israel has already claimed that there is a questionable methodology behind the report itself. They've also consistently said things like UNRWA workers being a part of Hamas, the IPC failing to take into account the measures that Israel is taking in Gaza. What do you make of that response to a report as grave as the one that we've seen today?
We've talked a lot about claims that have been made. And I think one of the things that's important for us to remember is throughout this conflict, an information war has been waged as well as the war on the ground. And I think it's up to every individual to recognize that they are a witness to what is happening and to think critically about what they're hearing and what they're seeing, and that, to validate that reality, and act upon it to try and make change. I think that's incumbent upon all of us to think critically, to validate what we're seeing, and to take action. I think today is a really good example. We've got a report that's been issued by a group of independent international experts that work in conflicts or humanitarian situations, not necessarily conflicts, all over the world. They've been monitoring this situation for almost 2 years now, and they have the evidence before them to say that there is a famine. And this is a respected group. I would urge everybody to read that report from cover to cover and to really consider it, and to take on top of that everything else that we know and that we've seen, the footage that has live streamed on people's phones and into their living rooms, testimony from people on the ground, humanitarian workers like me, but also Palestinians who've been constantly raising the alarm. I think we have to take all of that into account and then consider, is it true that this is false? Is it true that this is not happening? To me, no. That claim is contrary to all of the evidence that we have before us.
Mm-hmm. There's a phenomenon in the online space where you just mentioned the information war, but when one goes to look for things like the IPC report or general UNICEF reporting, or for want of a better phrase, pro Gaza reporting on the situation in Gaza, oftentimes you're kind of met with this slew of Israeli government results on Google searches or just general search engines that Israeli reports on situations are the first things that come up in your investigations on the topic. As someone who works for the largest international organization kind of on the ground there, how do you find hope in documenting what's going on and having to constantly fight this battle to the people that aren't there or the people that are curious to know what's happening, and are already finding it difficult to find the information from the source?
I think the thing that gives me the most clarity and hope is that from the perspective here on the ground, it's very simple. Really is. It's very simple and it's very clear. And any person that you speak to in Gaza will tell you the same thing. They will tell you that they're a civilian who is being impacted by a conflict that they don't want a part of, particularly children. Every second person in Gaza is a child, and they were not involved in making this war, and there's nothing that they can do to end it. They just want it over so that they can go back to school and play with their friends. So to most people here, it's simple. And to me, it's simple that this has gone on far too long, that it's affecting people from all aspects of their lives, the humanitarian crisis, the malnutrition, but also the ongoing bombardments. I don't know if you just heard that big one every
Yeah.
day. I think that that's what gives me hope, is that it really is clear. And when I speak to people like yourself and to people in the community, when I leave Gaza, I think other people understand that too, at their core. And really, people do want to see change. People do want to do what they can to try and make a difference for the people of Gaza. I think that we just need more of a collective swell among people bringing that change together in order to see a difference.
On a governmental scale, what does that change look like? I mean, what more can the international community do to push Israel to alleviate the suffering in Gaza?
So I think we've spoken about individual power, and I do believe that there is still power in individual action, and then all of that individual action becoming a collective action from the people. That I think still holds incredible power, particularly to influence our governments. Then at a government level, I do think that more can be done. The international community still has not found a way to influence this situation, to end this conflict, or even to increase the amount of aid entering the Gaza Strip. So as UNICEF, we continue to call on the international community to use every lever in their power, whether that's a political lever, an economic lever, to do what they can to protect the children of Gaza and stop this war.
And just finally, you're talking about economic levers. The news in the UK yesterday was £2 billion went from the UK government to Elbit Systems, which is Israeli weapons manufacturer, manufactures drones for the IDF. The UK government gave them £2 billion to provide training for 60,000 British soldiers over the next while. Um, when we're talking about the economic levers, like social levers, diplomatic levers that Western nations can pull, how does this contrast with what's needed?
There's something called the AWIPA Declaration, which is a declaration that a number of countries, including the UK, have signed about the use of explosive weapons in populated areas. Explosive weapons have a massive effect on children when they're used in populated areas, particularly if they're used indiscriminately, like we're seeing here in Gaza. I've witnessed it firsthand. I've seen what these weapons do to children's bodies. I've met kids who have had multiple amputations. I've met children with horrific burns, open wounds that can't be treated here in Gaza, so they're just languishing in pain in a hospital bed. We need countries to consider that declaration and what it is asking of them, which includes the transfer of weapons to countries that may use them in a way that impacts children, like I've just described. That's key. We need to see that across the board in order to stop the killing and injuring of children in Gaza.